Hello guys! Okay, so I thought I'd spring this one onto you. I didn't actually want to announce that I was making the BTS video again because it's a nice big fun one that people didn't see coming, and hopefully a lot of you guys have a lot to say on BTS. This could be fun for interactions and getting to know what you all think. The main issue with BTS is there's a lot of places you know, everyone just knows them, right? 2 to 4, it's a bit of a minefield of who could be where. And there's a lot of different opinions and a lot of different reasoning as to why certain people are in certain places. This is why I'm excited to do this one. Yes, half the group may be rappers, but that's not what you're here for. You're here between 2 and 4, just to see what's going on. Or a lot of you guys are, because that's what most vocal rankings differ on. So, for anyone wondering where the BTS ranking went before, I initially made the first video to basically start the channel and to see if I could get anywhere. And then, I'll be honest, I'll hold my hands up, BTS were the biggest group in the world, so I thought they were my in as to making me have any kind of following. I was wrong, and that's fine, and I didn't take that video anywhere near as seriously with as much research and as much actual knowledge as I could have done. I had an idea, went with it, tried to play a joke on a couple of members, it didn't really work for me. So, yeah, I wanted to remake it with a lot more seriousness since the channel has actually obviously taken off and people kind of value what I say in my opinion. I wanted to research them properly, actually break some stuff down and say things that actually were correct and mattered. So yes, for anyone who was wondering where it was, that is why it went. And I didn't like that video very much, I wasn't very proud of it. So this one will be better, hopefully. Now, I'm not going to say anything else. You're here for BTS, you want to know who's where, let's just get going. Okay, so last time I did this, I placed Sugar a little bit higher because I thought I heard some things from his voice that weren't necessarily there. A lot of the time he generally sings while joking, but there are some clips of him singing a little more seriously here and there. His voice isn't super versatile and doesn't have a lot of technical ability necessarily, but he definitely has potential and something there he could work on. Let's watch him sing and I'll try and break down what he does and what he could do in future. Okay, so to me, Sugar's voice dynamically has quite a lot going for it, but the main issue is that melodically it doesn't necessarily. Okay, so what I mean by that is Sugar's voice is actually quite hooty. And what I mean by a hooty voice is it has a lot of natural kind of underground depth almost. That might sound like a really strange thing to say, but if someone's normal voice is a hooty voice is more and everything sounds like it's got this depth underneath it, which if you utilise that effectively with placement and bring it into higher spaces with that depth and then go into mixed register and things, it can get you to really high, full, thick, beautiful areas. The issue Sugar's voice has is that normally he kind of places it a little bit far back with a raspy quality in his vocal delivery, which tells me that he's singing predominantly from the throat muscles rather than placing his voice anywhere in particular and have really efficient technical vocals. Because of that, his tuning falls away quite badly, and Sugar, a lot of the time when the backing track is helping him out a little bit, he can sing in some interesting ranges. His voice has a lot of different places to go into, and it sounds fine, but when he's kind of more acoustic and sometimes playing about, sometimes actually singing properly, his voice, it has a lack of tuning because, as I say, when you place your voice a little bit further back than actually hootier quality, it's very hard to maintain melody and tuning in that particular part of your voice. As well as that, when he goes up into a higher area, one of two things kind of happens. Either he goes a little tiny bit nasal, I've noticed, and thins out things kind of okay, and sings in an area fairly nicely. In Seesaw, it sounded fairly controlled in that high area, again because there was a lot of backing track help. But it sounded like if he went up, he could utilise a more nasal placement to thin things out and get into that space. But again, mixed with kind of a far back placement, it kind of restricts somewhat as high as a mix can go into, and his falsetto ability isn't really there, and he has no passage or navigation to speak of. So his mix register isn't really there. Sometimes what he does though is maintains a chord closure from his naturally huskier, thicker, deeper voice and belts kind of high, but again, because he doesn't have mixed placement down or ability to transition into more of a head voice or to place things forward or more in his head, his voice gets a bit stuck in his throat and sounds really raspy and really uncomfortable. So to me, Sugar's instrument, because it's thicker and heavier, if he worked on placement or really cared to work on placement, I know he doesn't really care to, he's a very, very good rapper, so his singing ability is kind of indifferent, but he could easily get into higher spaces really efficiently. But right now he doesn't really, and he more kind of belt shouts or rapper sings, which is kind of like a unmelodic shout almost, or he kind of sings a little bit nasal and controls things okay, but with no real range or control or melody or tuning really. So Sugar's not a bad singer necessarily, he could very well be very good one day if he ever wanted to be, but right now he's just okay because he limits himself a little bit vocally and plays about with it quite a lot. But he's still a decent enough vocalist as rappers go. You know what, I'm going to say it, last time I did Mr. Kim Namjoon a massive disservice. I put in a few clips of him kind of scream singing, showing no range and showing no control, and that wasn't fair. I didn't know of other things around and I was just doing that mainly to play it off as a joke and have a laugh. That was not fair at all, and for those who saw the other video, I'm very sorry. Mr. Kim Namjoon, RM, has a much nicer voice than I initially gave him credit for. Admittedly, it's not, again, technically super impressive and have much in the way of ability or range or variety, but it's a nice honey voice that has definitely potential to do some things. Let's watch him sing and I'll break him down.
You love me, girl, so that I love you. Yes. Eternally, I wanna love you more. Eternally, I wanna love you more. Eternally.
I think that RM might be playing with us. I think he secretly can sing a lot better than he showcases, just doesn't really fancy it to give the rest of the guys on the vocal line their chance to shine because him, Sugar and JHope are good at rapping and don't need to do all those vocals as well. I couldn't find too many songs and clips of RM singing, but back in the day when I did the list before, I only showed him kind of scream singing to show his glaring negatives, but he has a lot of positives as well. The main issue, I'm going to start with that of RM's voice, is it's dynamically not super versatile because he has kind of no ability in passage or navigation or using any sort of mixed register. The main issue with RM's voice is when he's trying to transition from his lower chest voice into a more of a falsetto place, he can't really work out that stylistic placement and go from this super thick, heavy voice that he has, this husky, more baritone voice, into this kind of thinner, more soft falsetto. A lot of people that kind of understand good singing fundamentals can bridge that gap nice and efficiently. That's the issue with RM's voice. He can't bridge the gap. And that's why he sounds a lot of the time that he can't sing too well, because obviously BTS have written a pretty damn high key, particularly for a thicker baritone voice. So when he's trying to get into those higher areas, he has no knowledge of what to do in the middle. That's his main vocal weakness and why he's as far down. The positive his voice has is, to me, while Sugars can do more dynamically with the voice that he's got and he can go into other ranges, the range that he actually operates in, for me, RM is slightly more consistent, more tuneful and more melodic and a little bit more controlled. Most of the time when he sings in like a lower, thicker, husky or honey kind of way. He sings with quite a lot of air in his sound. It's not super thick and super heavy, but it's low and it's got a nice masculine quality to it. And when he's in this low part of his voice, he sounds comfortable. He sounds nice and unique and rich. Again, because he doesn't use a lot of chord closure, it doesn't set him up too well as he goes up in terms of getting to a mixed register or using chord closure in a higher space. But as he goes up, he has shown that sometimes he can add that chord closure from his naturally huskier, thicker voice and belt a little bit. Again, not super tuneful or super melodic or go any higher because he hasn't got passage navigation down too well, but he can bring that kind of thicker, fuller coordination up into a slightly higher space, and then it sounds pretty decent when he does that. So to me, he's got dynamically a bit of potential. If he can work out how to bridge that gap into getting into his falsetto, he can have a really decent voice actually, but for now it's fairly limited, but sounds kind of controlled and kind of melodic and kind of nice in that thicker low baritone area. When he belts into a slightly higher space, when he wants to showcase that he's got it, he has kind of got it. So to me, he's more controlled than Sugar, not quite as versatile, but he's got more tuning just about, I think. So to me, JHope is the definition of a lot of potential with his natural instrument. Doesn't do a lot with it right now because he kind of doesn't need to, but his voice has a lot of character and could definitely get into places where the vocal line could kind of reach sometimes and do a lot more than the two guys in the rap line. I think JHope has got a nice voice and one that could definitely have a lot more in the tank should he ever want to implement it. Let's watch him sing and I'll break it down.
All day, everywhere. 모든 게 너에게 닿기 위함인 girl. 내 곁. 너에게 소리는 내게 돼. 어디고 외로운 것들을 네가 몰래. 아낌없이 시기에 버팀목이 올게. 나도 let me 믿으면 돼. 웃으면 보고 싶다. 너의 사진을 보고 있어도 보고 싶다. 너무 애석한 시간. To cry 울지 말아요 노래 불러봐요 울게요 언제나 그대 곁에서 영원히.
Okay, so I saw some videos claim that JHope was a secret vocal weapon. Now, I don't know whether I'd go necessarily that far, but he's a big step above the other two guys I mentioned so far in terms of vocal ability in the rap line. So, JHope's voice naturally has a lot more character and ping. Now, ping is, again, is a strange word to say, but ping is kind of a way that places your voice a little bit further forward, thins things out and lightens it and gets into a slightly higher space. So, what I mean by that is JHope's voice naturally, again, he's got a baritone vocal, and he sings in like a lower, kind of softer way. He doesn't use too much chord closure or too much grab, so when he goes up, he doesn't overcompress a stupid amount, but he can sing in a low, easy, baritone, low chest voice, nice and efficiently, nice and comfortably, with no real glaring issue. And as he goes up, Sugar sometimes will belt and bring up too much weight. RM won't know how to bridge that gap. JHope instead places his voice a little bit further forward and gets into a nice controlled higher space. The thing with JHope's voice is it has by far the most controlled rap line, by far the best tuning. You've heard him do a few times a nice vibrato. To me, Sugar and RM had no vibrato whatsoever, and when you do vibrato on a note, it suggests that you've got that note pretty consistently, pretty balanced, and pretty easily achieved. JHope's voice, as he goes into that higher area, he can add some vibrato to his notes. What he's doing to achieve those high notes, however, which is why he's obviously not as good as the vocal lines, he doesn't mix. He again brings up quite a lot of weight into a space, but doesn't overcompress horribly, which allows him to place his voice a little bit forward with that ping that I've mentioned, and get a kind of more open sound. Again, you see sometimes as he goes up to these notes, his throat starts to go and he is bringing up quite a lot of weight as he hasn't got the placement into his head fully, but because his voice has got that natural ping to go forward and place it a little bit further forward, his voice has an easier time achieving those higher mid-belt spaces, which gives him a much more efficient technique in that area. As I say, his main glaring weakness is he doesn't mix really, and his voice does overcompress a little bit as he goes up, which restricts his ability to go any higher, really, in a mixed way. He does also have a pretty decent falsetto too that I've noticed on occasion. So yeah, JHope's voice is dynamically by far the best in the rap line, has by far the best tuning, and has a natural affinity and character to get into a medium and kind of mid-voice space that the other two guys can't really operate in because their voice doesn't have that same ping and same forward placement naturally. But again, his voice does somewhat suffer from the fact that he doesn't mix fully, which is a bit of an issue in the BTS vocal line, but again, they're rappers, so who really cares? Army, just listen, please. I get it. Jimin is a lead vocalist for a very good reason. His voice stylistically fits what K-pop want perfectly. It's high and it's unique, but just know unique and high doesn't equate to quality of technical vocal output. He's a good singer. I'm not saying he's a bad singer and can't sing like some people do. Absolutely not. He's a great singer. Just technically he is fourth in BTS, and please listen to my explanation before you kill me.
나의 천사 아쉬워진 거리 여기 난 맞춰 있는 날 혼자 가는 시간이 우리를 따라와 저 옆에 들어와 잘 네가 찾아낸 이곳에 너의 흔한 수에
Okay, so this is the one I've been dreading a little bit, Jimin. So, Jimin's absolute amazing vocal strength. He has been blessed with such a unique, fantastic instrument, which is capable of an awful lot of things. In my opinion, the reason that I put him fourth is because he has been, either from his own choices vocally on stage or because of what the company have asked him to do, his voice has been used totally wrong, which has made him a very, very inconsistent live performer. Sometimes he sounds fantastic, and sometimes he doesn't sound the best because his voice is a bit more hoarse, a little more throaty, and has some problems with placement. Okay, so Jimin's voice is very, very small and feminine and almost androgynous in terms of how light and high it sits. He sits in a tessitura or comfortable range that most tenors would absolutely kill for. So when he's singing softly around this G4, A4 kind of area that most people are belting their back end off for, he sounds really comfortable and like he's at ease vocally, which makes him sound like he's got a very, very, very good vocal tone. Now, while he's singing incredibly softly like that, his voice sounds immaculate. It sounds beautiful, it sounds easy, and that's how a voice that's that thin and that light should really be implemented. People say angel voices. Now, angel voices in K-pop are the ones that are kind of very falsetto flip heavy. It sounds super soft and really comfortable and really easy all the time. And if Jimin sang only like that, his voice would be brilliant, pristine. He wouldn't have had any of the vocal issues that he had for a long time in his career. The main issue with Jimin's vocal delivery is because it is so small, he was asked to sing really big. He does a lot of high belts and a lot of high falsettos, but because his voice is so naturally small, he unfortunately decided that he wanted to basically compress his vocal cords to get that bigger kind of sound. So with a voice that small, really what you want to do is kind of place it in the head, place it nice and forward, bring up a little bit of weight that you've got, and just kind of accept that you've got a slightly smaller sound and use a lot of head voice work to really get that higher key. What he did instead was over-compress like hell, bring up what little weight he had, which wasn't natural for his natural lack of chord closure in his vocals, up into a higher space, which made everything quite strained and quite squeezed. Now, sometimes he placed it in his head nice and forward, opened his mouth nice and wide, and it became more open and more resonant. But a lot of the time, his voice sounds shaky, the notes fall off towards the end, and because his voice is fatigued, it's tired, because it is bringing up so much weight from his vocal cords alone rather than placing it in his head or further forward or using that kind of softer voice in a naturally more delicate, gentle way. His voice just, it became hoarse and struggled to have the stamina. So to me, Jimin's voice, while capable of very, very high falsettos, again, that were kind of pushed from a thin voice up into a higher space, he has a lot of potential in his voice, and if they just stepped it back a little bit and let him be more restrained like he is sometimes, his voice is gorgeous. But because it's not big and he's being asked to sing big, his technique is really dangerous and it's not ideal. So I'm not saying he's a bad singer, he's a good singer with a beautiful instrument. He just hasn't been utilised very effectively, which is why his vocals are so inconsistent, sometimes amazing, sometimes not so good. He is working on it and I applaud him for that. He has got a lot better recently, but for a long part of his career he was quite cracky and struggled quite a lot purely because he was singing basically really compressed in the throat, which the rest of the guys in the vocal line, while on occasion do a little bit, is nowhere near as big and prominent an issue. So yes, armies, I hope that explains kind of what Jimin's voice is like. I don't think he's a bad singer. I think he's a great singer. He's a lead vocalist because his voice works in a place that most people's doesn't. But technically, he has been used a little bit wrong. Okay, so I've seen a lot of people put Jin second or fourth. A lot of people have been claiming he's very underrated. Yeah, he is kind of underrated. He's a really good vocalist. To me, he's got a little bit more technical tension in certain parts of his voice than 2 and 1 for me personally. But he's still a very good singer who deserves to get a little bit more plaudits for his vocal ability than he gets. Let's watch him sing and I'll break him down.
두려워 이 밤이 지나 보이지 않던 영원의 밤 내게 아침을 선물 I have reasons I should love myself 널 것만 있어.
Okay, so Jin's voice for me improved a hell of a lot over the years, and you can particularly see his vocal qualities and strengths where he sings more solo songs so we can get a huge kind of gauge as to the entire spectrum of his vocals and his range. So while Jimin overcompresses kind of all the time because his voice is naturally smaller, Jin has a much naturally bigger instrument that he uses very efficiently in multiple different ways. So when he's in his lows, again, because he's got a tenor voice, his voice isn't very heavy or very low. I've noticed that when he's kind of starting songs in the low end of his chest voice, he uses quite a lot of air to keep things nice and thin, nice and soft. He doesn't use as much air as a couple of the guys coming up that I'm going to mention, but he has enough air in his sound that when he's bringing to a middle space, he's not overcompressing like hell. So when he is in the middle of his voice, he sounds really comfortable and really easy. Jin's voice sounds quite at ease up to around an F4, G4 before he's starting to implement the chord closure his voice naturally has up into a higher space. So the thing that makes Jin's voice quite a lot better than Jimin's in my opinion is his voice is a lot bigger, so when he goes into that natural belt range where Jimin's overcompressing like hell, Jin's only overcompressing a little bit. So Jin's voice, he has a naturally quite nasal placement. You can hear it when he goes higher and higher, but he also is a little bit fearless vocally. He kind of goes for the note and gets it most of the time. He's a very consistent live performer, but he does a lot of that, so he opens his mouth very wide, but he's using a lot of muscle from the throat to kind of get to these notes. So I don't think his placement is perfect, and you can tell that he's still straining a little bit to get to these notes, but because he's got a nasal placement, he's thinning his vocal tone out enough to get into that middle space quite effectively, but because it's quite a heavy nasal placement, he is also bringing the voice up from his throat a little bit. But when he does go higher occasionally, he does place things a little bit further into his head and a little bit more forward, more consistently than Jimin does in my opinion. So his upper belt sound, while still a little bit strained, much more consistent and much easier to produce and much bigger and more natural for the vocal that he actually has. So he's not singing technically way outside of what his voice should be doing. As well as that, he's got a really unexpectedly good falsetto. When he thins things out and brings basically no weight up at all, he's got a lovely falsetto which he can sing above the 5th octave at some stage, nice and efficiently, nice and easily, lovely and relaxed. He doesn't have the mix and the power in his falsetto that some people do that I've noticed, but he has a nice thin, easy time up there, and he's very efficient in that area. So for me, Jin's voice all the way through is a little bit more polished than Jimin's. It's a little bit more consistent and less vocally dangerous, I suppose, but he still does overcompress a little bit when he goes up because of the nasal placement that he does implement in his higher belt. But the power in his voice is really good, and he actually implements his vocals in a really consistent way. Just for me, 1 and 2 are quite a bit more controlled in a lot of aspects, but Jin is actually very underrated, so go Jin. Okay, so last time I put V third, and I thought I had pretty good reasons for that, but when I thought more about it, he's got great control, great range, and he's the only baritone in a vocal line full of tenors singing comfortably in that key, so technically he must be doing something pretty impressive, right? Absolutely. Let's watch him sing, and I'll break him down too.
감춰도 지워지지 않아 샴의 손을 뜬 여긴 대원이 어쩜 서울 또 뉴욕을 페리스 이러다니 휘청 얼마나 기다려요 두몇 밤을.
Okay, so why have I put V above Jin? A lot of people think Jin is higher, and that's fair enough, he's got more power vocals and things like that. For me, V does a lot of the things that Jin does, but he's a baritone. The range that V sings in comfortably throughout BTS's songs and as relaxed as he does is actually really impressive, and technically he's doing some really bizarre, interesting, wonderful things to get into that particular area of his voice. So his lows are probably the best outside the rap line in the group. Admittedly, V very famously sings with a lot of breath and air in his sound, while as he goes higher that's really important, that I'll get into in a second, but it does limit his low range a little bit. So I sing like, "Girl, I tell you something." He's not using a great deal of chord closure in his sound, so it does kind of restrict how low he can go. For a baritone vocalist, his voice isn't that low. It's nice and rich and deep enough to have that lovely stylistic quality that people like, but it's not super mega low. But he's comfortable much lower than the rest of the vocal line because they're all tenors and he's a baritone, so he has that avenue to his voice that those guys don't have. The thing that's amazing about his voice is because of how much breath is in the sound, he can sing very, very relaxed and not over compressed as he goes into that lower tenor key that most of BTS music is sang in, between like the D and the E4 to really complement Jungkook's vocals. As he kind of goes into that range, instead of being a baritone like me who start belting and bring up a lot of weight and chord closure, because V's natural singing style is so soft and so light and so airy, he is relaxed and not bringing up way too much tension from his vocal cords up into that space around the C4 or the D4, which for a baritone is really, really impressive. And if you're singing a repertoire that high, that often with that voice type, you are technically doing something very, 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 very well. Now, admittedly, sometimes if you use a lot of air in your sound and that's all you know, the chord closure feeling doesn't really translate up and you don't have much of a mixed voice, whereas V's does. V's voice, up until around the F4 or so, it's quite big and quite full because it has a natural weight of a baritone vocal, but because he uses a lot of air in his sound, it thins it out naturally and gets it into a higher space fairly efficiently, and he uses chord closure to belt into a bigger place. Admittedly, it does sound a little bit strained on occasion because when he's singing into a higher space, his voice isn't designed to go that high. It's a tenor range and baritones will have to strain quite a lot to get into that range regardless of how good your technique is really. So because it's breathier and fuller with a bit of chord closure, he has a nice open belt and he likes to keep it quite full and keep his mouth open quite wide. And admittedly, yes, he still overcompresses a little bit, which is why I've put him second, but in terms of his actual mixed range and the relaxed nature of his vocals all the way through due to the air he implements them is very, very, very good indeed. As well as that, as you saw in Stigma, he can bring up a falsetto really high, and baritones often have the ability to have the weight in their voice, bring it up into a head dominant space, bring it forward, unless he's "Wah!" kind of notes. We can do that quite easily because of the weight in our voice. So V has a lot of control up into a certain area, a lot of dynamics to his vocals, less compression for me in the range that he operates in comfortably than Jin and Jimin, and a really nice range and falsetto all the way through. He just isn't quite as controlled and understands his voice necessarily as well as number one for me, but in my opinion he's closer to number one than he is to number three. Okay, at number one, there was no dispute, nobody surprised by this, the golden machinate Jungkook. I will just say, I would say V is closer to Jungkook's ability than he is to Jin's ability, in case people are curious as to where the differential was there. But Jungkook, in my opinion, has the most control of his voice, understands it the best, and uses it in the most technically efficient way for the music that he is trying to produce. Okay, let's watch him sing with those beautiful vocals. I'll break it down.
세상이 멈췄어 아무런 예가 더 하나 없이 몸은 기다림을 몰라서 기회를 줘.
Okay, so no one's really surprised by Jungkook first, are they? The gold machinate, the boy can do everything. He's annoyingly talented, as I mentioned before, and he's just quite good. Okay, so he may not have the extensive range of V, the incredible power of Jin, or the really, really high light androgyny of Jimin, but he's got by far the most control, understands his voice by far the best, and has been working on avenues to get it higher and higher, away from the technique he normally implements. Okay, so Jungkook is not a power vocalist. There's a lot of groups that have like a big power belter, And a lot of people might think Jungkook fits that role, but no, he's a much more stylistic, agile R&B, soft, pretty vocalist, but he does so really efficiently and really well. Okay, so the lower end of his voice isn't like super mega impressive, just like the rest of the tenors. He has kind of a thinner, lighter voice that he operates a little bit higher in range, so his lower end of his voice isn't really much to write home about, but it's controlled, it's easy, and it sounds nice enough. The thing that Jungkook's voice is really good at is in the kind of C, D, E4 area where a lot of BTS's music is written in, particularly in the verses. His voice is really clear, really consistent, and has next to no tension whatsoever. So a lot of the time he stays with the chord closure in his voice up into that range nice and efficiently. He brings it nice and forward. It sounds really, as I say, clear and polished and full and big. In that area, it sounds beautiful. Jungkook has never ever really been a big belter. He's always favoured falsetto work and transitions from his passaggio. So he has a really beautiful kind of ability. He is very good at transitioning into his upper falsetto and making everything sound super relaxed and super easy. Admittedly, that sometimes can make it sound like you don't have much power or mix in your voice, but he has on several occasions when he wants to. Admittedly, not as high as a Jimin or a Jin, he can bring more weight into his voice, get past where he would normally flip into his falsetto using the passaggio, and unleash more of a bigger mixed belt. Again, it's not huge, he hasn't got sustainability in that particular area, but below that his voice is controlled, it's clear, it's nice, and when he goes into that slightly higher belt, he does sound really good as well. The thing that Jungkook has been working on more than anything is his upper mix. Now, again, he doesn't have a really chest-dominant upper mix like some power vocalists do, because obviously he doesn't implement a lot of weight in his sound. There's a lot of air naturally and a lot of kind of thinner vocal configurations, but what he has done is learn to place the voice in his head, bring up a little bit of weight that his voice does have, particularly in On most famously, and get into a higher, bigger mixed space. It's not fully a falsetto because there's a little bit of weight and power in that particular part of his voice, but he has got the most controlled head dominant mix in the group, the most controlled upper range in the group based on that particular coordination. He's got the most controlled, the most consistent, the most agile voice all the way through. He's got the best falsetto transitions, and he knows his voice by far the best. And yes, he might not be a power vocalist, and is he the best main vocalist in K-pop in terms of technique and everything? Probably not, but that doesn't matter. He's got a beautiful voice that a lot of people love, that he uses very, very, very well, and I've very rarely seen him have even a half shaky performance. So he clearly knows exactly what he's doing perfectly with his vocals, so Jungkook is absolutely #1 in BTS. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching this. I don't know what video is going to be next, possibly another opinion one. You guys seem to like those quite a lot. Maybe on my favourite singing clips in K-pop. We'll see what I fancy. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's a bit of a scary one to make, BTS, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware. But I wanted to make a better video for you guys, and apologies it is a little bit longer than I was going to make it, but I apparently had a lot more to say than I expected. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.